Hey, I'm down here. We had a bunch of teenagers last night. I was tasked with this, what I feel like is an impossible task by people above me at NOPA to try to talk about diversity, specifically to the students. And I always worry I'm going to say something wrong or get fired around this, but let me see what I can say. And I had been thinking about this. I got this assignment, I don't know, probably about a week ago. And I was mulling over what to say and what not to say and doing research and reading different things. But it kind of came together. I just got back from a dog walk. And when I was out walking the dog, there was a man coming the other direction. And I noticed he had a full beard and a shaved head and walking a beagle. So I saw him approaching, and this is just the truth of implicit bias and the way our brain works. I was trying to make sense of who I was walking towards. Now I do this with everyone. Being in Colorado for a long time is often I scan at a distance to see if it might be a concealed carry person, particularly if it's someone who looks like male, but I kind of look anyway. So when I saw the big salt and pepper beard and the shaved head, it reminded me of someone else in my neighborhood. I was walking on the trail, but I have someone in my neighborhood that has a very similar look with like olive brown skin. And this person always is walking a pit bull, and he's always wearing like an American flag shirt and buff as anything. And I just had made the assumption that this guy is a conservative person. So given that these two people had the same haircut and skin color, I didn't know anything about them, right? It's just all projection, like I've said in other videos. So we kind of approached each other, and I have my dogs, he had his dogs. And I said something like, "Oh, she's really friendly. This guy's a little unpredictable. Let these two say hi first." And he goes, "Oh, that sounds good. She's really, really friendly with everyone." And then we had like a simple comment, "What's your dog's name?" And we said our dog's name. And I said, "I'm Francis. What's your name?" And he said his name was Mo. And I was like, "Nice to meet you, Mo." Now this stuff's going on. And I think the more you know about diversity, the more you know about the world, the more stuff will hopefully be going on in your head. So when I heard Mo, of course, I thought of Mo from our department. But I also wondered I know of people who go by Mo who are Muslim, and it's short for Muhammad. So I also know people go by Mo whose name is Maurice. And maybe this person could have been, say, Algerian with a name like Maurice, right? So, you always have an opportunity to broach there. Now, my approach as a counselor and as a person may not be your approach. And so I didn't ask like, "Oh, is that short for something?" I just let that go in some way. And I said something along the lines of like, "Oh, it's the first time I've seen you out here." And he said, "Oh yeah, my family just moved." And I said, "Oh, how do you like it?" And he said, "Oh, I like it more than I thought I would like it. How long have you been here?" And I said, 33 years. I moved from New Jersey. And he said, "Oh, I have a lot of family back in New Jersey." And then he offered up that, "Oh, I'm from Puerto Rico, and I have lots of family members from who live in Jersey." And I said, so that gave me some idea about this person's identity, although it can be wrong. I think of Ann Alonso, one of the most famous group therapists ever, is from Cuba, but of Lebanese descent. So, and she identified mainly as Lebanese, but also as Cuban and also as American in some way. And so I asked a question, which I think would be good as you get to know clients, like, oh, what do you like? And he said, oh, I honestly don't know. I just got out of the military and I'm taking classes at CU, right? And I said, oh, what are you taking, right? And I actually didn't say that much about myself in this conversation with him, but we're broaching and growing intimacy to some degree in these conversations in a way that's safe and not centered necessarily around differences in some way. He goes, oh, I'm studying art and political science. And I don't know what I'll do. And I said something like, oh, maybe you'll do both. No, maybe you'll be do political art. I have no idea of their political affiliation in some way. And this may not be true for everyone else, but living in Longmont, it's a pretty divided city, and people have all kinds of political views. And I try to connect and be humane with people, regardless if their views are different than my views in some way. And I said, oh, what kind of art? And he said, oh, I've been, getting into painting. And I said something like, oh, my wife's been getting into painting. She comes from a family of artists. And he said, oh, I come from a family of artists, but I haven't really done that. And I said, oh, are you taking art classes? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, 2 doors down from me, because we're kind of in this neighborhood, Alvin teaches fine arts at CU. And he goes, oh, I don't know if I met him. And then there's a choice point. So I know Alvin. Alvin's my neighbor. Alvin identifies as Filipino American, and he paints kind of this neo-realist, that's one way to describe it, works of different people of Filipino descent. And so I didn't say like, oh yeah, if you see Alvin, he would be the person from the Philippines or the Asian person. So right, that's just totally racist, right? So of course you don't say that, right? So I think I said something like, oh, he paints kind of in this neo-realist style of people from the Philippines. And he goes, oh, I think I've seen some of those paintings in some way. So I think this is all to do with broaching in some way, that we're beginning conversations about identity and differences. We have some connections around, having been in New Jersey, we obviously have different identity differences, different professional differences, maybe different political differences, and not addressing them quite at this point. So we kept talking about various things, and I learned more about him, that he was in the Air Force, and I told the story of my father was in the Navy in World War II, and would never let me go into the military because he cleaned up dead bodies off aircraft carrier. He was on an aircraft carrier, cleaned up dead bodies off Pacific Islands. And he goes, yeah, I would never let my son go into the military either. And I said, oh, I have a son too. And I said, oh, my son's name is Levi. So I'm sharing a little bit more about myself, broaching, right? I said Levi. I could have said Levi, right? That would be the Hebrew pronunciation. And he said, his son's name is Salvador. And then we ended up talking about Dolly a little bit, and like, what's your son into? And he's like, oh, my son's into music. I said, oh, my son really loves hip hop. And he goes, oh, that's funny. My son plays the bassoon and really loves classical music. And I said, oh, my son also loves chess. And he said, oh, my son really likes chess too. And I said, oh, every Friday night at the Trident, there's the Boulder Chess Club. And maybe you or your son would like to come with us. It's a really, really nice crowd. I said this, which is true. It's a really diverse crowd. It's a really friendly crowd. So in some ways, I'm bringing up some awareness, I guess, of identity differences in my conversation. So I'm talking about how I am sizing up Mo. I still don't know what Mo stands for, or maybe that's the full name. And we actually exchanged each other's text numbers. And it's been a journey for me, and I'm very proud of myself, given where I came from. It took me a little while into college to make friends with people who might be of Protestant descent and say upper class, but I have friends who come from that background, right? Whatever background you are from, you get raised with prejudice, I believe, in this country. But I'm guessing Mo is sizing me up also every second. Who is this white guy? He has 2 poodles. What might that mean? He's wearing this hat. What might that mean in some way? And we just don't know, right? This is the truth of it. So I guess it's a choice, right? And then in some theories of diversity, you would kind of immediately start with saying something like, oh, right, if Mo was my client in the first session, oh, how is it to be with a white male straight therapist? Because I don't know anything else about, I have no idea of Mo's gender identity, sexual preference. I don't know any of that. But I really like this question. A couple of questions I like early on. One is like, oh, what do you like? It's a pretty neutral question. Sometimes I'll say like, oh, is there anything you'd like to, anything you'd like me to know about you? Sometimes, I'm not a prescriptive script person, right? You have scripts in your head. You have all these diversity scripts in your head of how to talk about diversity and how to do it. And they're like voices and friends, and you get informed by your friends' voices who have written about and thought about, and you've talked to about diversity in some manner. And then sometimes I'll say something like, "Oh, I'm Francis. I am. If you're curious, I am what I look like. I'm white. I've been in a heterosexual marriage for 33 years." Usually with a name like Francis, they think most likely, I would imagine people think I'm Catholic, right? And my mother was Catholic and my dad was Jewish, so I identify more so with my Judaism, Buddhism than my Catholicism in some way. Hearing Mo's from Puerto Rico, I'm thinking there might be some Catholicism in Mo's background in some way. So we're just tracking all this, and I'm guessing Mo's tracking all this as our clients are tracking everything we're saying. So I would say within the first 15 minutes of the session, somehow you find a way to broach this idea of difference in some way. You try to do that. And my approach is not to hit people over the head with that in some way. And see where they want to take the conversation to some degree. So I think the challenge is, particularly in the early sessions, and this works for group too, is that there's a emphasis on pointing out similarities. So I pointed out a similarity. Mo and I both identify as parents, right? And I know that much about Mo. But there's lots I didn't know and I didn't ask. And it reminded me of, I have a group with 2 individuals who identify as non-binary in the group. And they're kind of at different identity development phases with that identity. And I think we go through various identity development phases with all of our intersectional identities, or we try to be conscious of it. And one person really barely wants to talk about being non-binary, wants to talk about their work, wants to talk about their partnership, wants to talk about their children. The other person has just recently identified this way and come out and has a lot of stress around, all the oppression of the culture, parents trying to be supportive, but saying the wrong thing all the time, often enough. So you can try to think about that, and you let your client talk about their identity, what part of their intersexual identity, and how much they want to talk about that intersectional identity, and you broach it and you find an invitation, right? So I might say, oh, can you tell me more about yourself or more about your family? Or, I love this question, more about why did you come to Naropa in some way? Sometimes I do this, right? It can be real subtle. I might ask, like, oh, do you have any siblings? And they'll say, oh yeah, I have a couple of siblings, Jack and Chris. And I'll be like, oh, I might even say it this clearly. Oh, how do they identify? Which is like, could mean a lot of things I'm thinking about in terms of gender identity. So, and if you don't know a lot about diversity in these conversations, I think that, you can read. There's nothing better than having diversity experiences. I think for white therapists who didn't grow up this way, that you get more comfort with this. Now, if you're not a white male therapist, you know what oppression's about in a much bigger way, and you're used to dealing with the whiteness and patriarchy in the world in some way. So it reminds me of a story. So I have a dear friend, Charlie Davis. We worked at Crisis for like a year, and we knew each other. And we talked about music. He's a musician, and he said he had 2 boys, and we talked about it. And he said he watched me for a year before and his boy, although he's white, he's a hillbilly from the Ozarks, dirt roads, bare feet, unbelievable banjo player, almost a cliche of like Deliverance or something. But he adopted 2 boys that are twins, and I want to out their identity of some notoriety, that have they're half African American, and let's say this example, half Filipino. He said he watched me for a year to look for signs of racism in me before he would introduce me to his children. And eventually we lived together, and he was divorced, and the kids came back and forth. But I think, we're watching our therapists, we're watching our friends, like, what are they saying between the lines? So the story about Charlie is, at one point, and his boys were the ushers at my wedding, me and Elizabeth's wedding, and he bought one of the boys a Pontiac, and now we knew a lot about each other, like their first car. And I said, oh yeah, where I grew up, we would say Pontiac. It has the same amount of syllables as Cadillac. Now, this was a broaching of a friend at this point. Now, Pontiac and Cadillac has a lot of racial information, a lot of bias, totally weighted. To the degree that I understand the weighting of this. I was trying to connect around this, and he said to me, I think that's racist. I can't believe you said that to me. And I said, yeah, I can see that. And I thought about whether I should say that or not say that. And maybe I shouldn't have said that. And let's talk about it. And then we talked about it. But there was a base there that he could talk to me. He could call me out on this. I think of my dear friend Ian Wickerman-Sacra, who has also done this with me. But there's a foundation of respect, curiosity, that from that base you can have these conversations. And I think that in therapy, or say potentially my new friend Mo, at one point we might have this conversation like, oh, when I met you, I thought bop, 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 bop. And now I see you this, right? We put people in usually the most prominent intersectional identities of, race, gender, sexual preference, religion, class, immigration status, right? There's a hierarchy of intersectional identities that are oppressed against in our culture, right? And you should know all this and learn all this if you don't know all this yet. And you don't learn it immediately. You put effort into it. So in therapy, I think you one to follow the client's lead, and they might broach something with you that isn't this clear. But I could imagine saying something like, how are we getting along? Hey, at least in my thought, I'm like, hey, I have a very kind of colloquial, kind of New Jersey way of speaking. Sometimes I insult people or hurt people. Has that happened in there? And, oh, no. Would you tell me if I did? And they're like, probably not. And I said, well, anything I can do that would make that better. And sometimes we have to talk about it. Like sometimes they want to know more about me, or that might help that in some way. And particularly if you're talking about people with oppressed identities as well-earned mistrust. And is that okay? Like, I mean, I feel like they asked me to make this video mainly towards white students. And can you tolerate that? Right? It's like people with oppressed identities have been oppressed, marginalized, mocked, violently beat up, taken advantage of for millennia. And, it's white fragility, right? Somebody says something, and of course it happens to me. People see me and have thoughts about me, and some are right about, I've had an easier life in some way. But is that okay? So I feel like at least in my identities, any crap I take about my identities is 1/1,000,000th of the crap I would take if I had different identities. And I'm willing to tolerate that and work to be closer across different identities. So I think this is the dilemma, right? So there's all this research about cross-identity conversations. I think of Kirk Snyder, Better Angels, where these conversations start with highlighting, in this example, similarities between white police officers and African-American community leaders of all types, from reverends to people who might be involved in even gangs in some way. And they find each other's humanity. They find each other's shared values, right? Where can the connection, the similarities, and from these similarities, you really introduce talking about differences and hearing each other's perspectives or how they see the world and try to listen. But there's some foundation of trust, understanding initially, right? And I think the danger, at least what I think is the danger, is that, there's research on this. So white therapists will just stay there, and they won't ask, or they won't even hear when someone wants to talk about their experience of their identity, right? So how do you fine tune your ears of when people really kind of want some invitation to say more about that? And and that comes with time and trust, right? So I'm trying to think of a good example. I just added a new group member to one of my groups. I added a white man that is hesitant to, really sweet man, Buddhist, introduced himself in that way. And the group members were going around and my multiple people of color in group, and people said different things. And I think one person of color in the group said, "Oh, I wasn't sure if I would fit in here." And I said, "Oh, right? So this is an invitation. Do you want to say more?" And we had this conversation with the group. What would it be like if I brought a straight white male in this group? And we talked about it, and can't be a jerk, can't be an idiot, can't be have no awareness of oppression and privilege dynamics. And I think I said something like, "Oh, is there more you want to say about that?" And they said, "Not right now." And I think I said something like, "Does anybody else want to say more, anything?" And I think somebody said, like, "Yeah, we were scared that we were going to get a MAGA trumpet in here, and it was going to be a political argument and shitstorm. And while we talk about politics, sometimes, it's really not why we're here, and probably 5% of the time, or something less than that." So I'm thinking about therapy across identities in some way, right? So I think in some way maybe there's some similarities. There's curiosity, there's invitations to talk about identity repeatedly, from subtle to overt, and depending on what the person's working on, a lot of the therapy can be around their identity and wrestling with their identities from this demographic, sociocultural way. But really, I think almost part of every therapy is people are wrestling with who they are, how they fit in, how they don't fit in, what's possible for them, what's not possible for them. And a lot of these topics are, of course, deeply tied to what identity a client has in some way. Let me see if there's anything else worthwhile that I want to say about this. I guess I want to say this, right? I made you watch all these videos. So I think, right, what white therapists do, if they haven't done their work, is they're overrun and they're acting so much out of guilt and shame in some way. And I think this is a journey. And I think most white people have earned their guilt and shame for a lack of awareness and bad behavior in the past. And but eventually we have to try to come to terms with it, at least. So I think you might want to be aware of that. And then what really drives me crazy is, the performative, like, how do you show that you have identity awareness without being like overly scripted performative about this? With Mo, I could have said, "Oh, I have friends from Puerto Rico, right? Look at me. I'm a white guy with friends from Puerto Rico. I must be okay, right?" Don't do that. I don't know if that's making enough sense about that, but I mean, I'm sure we have all seen this or showing, something about the theory of intersectionality or diversity, and it will come up, but I don't think you force that in any way. And I guess I didn't say anything about this in an earlier video, but I actually I teach at Saybrook, and I was talking to a student who's finishing up their doctorate and actually finishing up their formal analytic training. And one of the sayings they said at their analytic school was that by the time you graduate from analytic school, you've developed your own theory of mind, which is everything your theory of what case conceptualization you use around people, whether it's drives or defenses or identity or social justice or object relations or the combo of all of this kind of thing. And we had the conversation about how it's good, at least in my view, that it's different. That differences are good. Now we're each our own unique therapists with our own unique theory of mind, but can we talk about it? Can we own it? And can we own it as not being correct? And, I'm Buddhist, which is we don't know what's going on. I'm postmodern, everything socially constructed in language and history. So that's not the flavor of a lot of schools of thought in therapy, right? You go through your certification, you're a purist. So I think, essentialism, it's a big topic in Buddhism. I'm sure you studied it, is what makes you you? What could I actually just had a brain scan, and it came out I have a little lesion, which is non-cancerous and probably not, gives me migraine sometimes, is what they think. If they took out that lesion from my brain, am I still me, right? If they cut off my arms, am I still Francis? At what point, what's the essential part of something? And in the Buddhist theory, there is no essential part of anyone, and really, going far down the road, we don't even exist, and we're just part of a bigger flow and dance with other phenomena in the world in some way. And it's a delusion that it's a functional delusion that we have to be aware of, that we exist in some way. And so the similar argument, to be in dialogue, not the same argument, is, around diversity is, my father memorized Merchant of Venice. What is a Jew, right? Does not a Jew bleed? And it's a question about, what is the essential element of any identity in some way, right? This is a bad example of Merchant of Venice because Shakespeare turns around after this very beautiful soliloquy of being humanity, and we're all being human, turns around and paints Shylock as kind of revengeful and hateful, and not a very good picture of not many Jewish characters in medieval literature outside of Jewish authors. But it's the same thing, right? So that's a tendency. We see someone's identity and we think there's some essential quality in that, right? I talked about, I might have told the story in group, Asian American man I had in group for a long time, and a very tall African American man came in, and as you could imagine, people in the group said, "Oh, do you play basketball? Did you play basketball?" Which I think is just fucking racist, heightist, and so I jumped in and be like, "Oh, why is that so important? Or are you just trying to connect?" Right? Because I have an empathetic heart. I saw this wish to welcome this person, and this was just something they knew nothing, and this was some thing they could say from the little bit of visual appearance of this person in some way. And they said, "Oh, he's just trying to connect." And I said, "Yeah, well, maybe you could say something less stereotyping. Maybe you could say something about yourself." And this new group member was a very tall African American man who actually did play basketball and played college basketball, turned to this shorter Asian man and said, "Yes, I played basketball. Are you a jockey?" But which is, totally sizist back at him, but said it in a playful way that showed some understanding, even though they have different racial identities and different stereotypes they each get from their size, that they could relate in some way. So, I guess sometimes I like to ask this question, as I think you might do at some point in therapy, a few different questions. I might ask something like, is there any, is there anything more you want to would like me to know about you? Sometimes I'll say something like, we all have visible and invisible identities. you can let me know if you want to know anything about any of mine, or if you ever want to tell me anything about any of yours. And I gave this, I probably said this, I gave this presentation with Marcy Turner, who's an African-American female psychologist. We gave it on intersectionality at the group conference. And in her talk, she said, it's very honest, like white people are trying to do it right in some way. And they just come in immediately and like try to talk all about race. And that's very, very off-putting, at least to her at this point. And like they want to be friends right away, and that things take time. So I think in exploring identity, which is a central part of all therapies, I think coming to terms with who we are, how we see each other, how others see us, how do we manage all this, how do you try to read the subtle cues of your clients to invite it and not force it, to welcome it but not require it. So, you know, if I had recommendations, right, you know, always working in empathy and compassion is a good thing to do. Accepting that the world is very ambiguous and you don't know, and hold on to that groundless ambiguity, as I'm guessing Mo and I and are doing, and as our children will do when they meet, most likely this Friday, playing chess together. That's how relationships are, right? I've been with my wife for 33 years. We're still ambiguous figures. I'm still projecting shit onto her. She's still projecting shit onto me. It's just the way the mind works in some way. And you kind of work through it in some way. But I guess like a foundation of a trusting relationship. It's impossible to know everything that's a microaggression. At least I think so, right? We learn, we try to study more, we try to study various cultures, and there's things that we might be trying to connect, but we might be being racist in some way, right? I think I heard a story of my son at a chess tournament, was playing someone with a Japanese name, and they played and stuff. And my son said, my son loves ramen. We make ramen. And said, do you like ramen? And like, no, why are you asking me? And it's just, a total racist, projective idea about their racial and ethnic identity in some way. So, those two got through that. And I think if you cannot get defensive and you try to expand your awareness of all these things, and you invite the client to give you feedback from early on, you show some awareness without being too performative of sociocultural oppression and privilege. You show some ownership, even in a non-performative, very subtle way, of your privileges. That may invite these dialogues, and then you just get supervision. And you, when in doubt, maybe think twice before saying what you're saying, right? Run it through the filters in your head of how other people think and talk about diversity in therapy, and whether you should say it or shouldn't say it. And there's people have different views than me that I think I respect, and they are correct that you bring it in immediately, right? This was a very popular idea a few years ago. Immediately in the first session, how is it to work with a straight white man? That's not the way I work now. I never worked that way, actually. I read the context, and I've heard enough people, colleagues of mine, say people with a intersectional oppressed identities that they didn't like that, and that felt not seeing them, simplifying intersectional identities into differences in a way that prevents deeper relationship in some way. And then other people really do like that because they need to hear that and own that and have that conversation as a pathway to trust. So I don't know how you might say this. Like, hey, should we talk about, you want to know anything more about me, anything more about my identity? Sometimes you just say that and you're signaling that you have some clues, if you do have some clues. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And then as a therapist, depending on how you're working, you pick and choose what you say. So in this conversation with Mo, right, that I started with, that was very impactful for me, that stirred me to try to figure out what I wanted to say about this topic per my power structure, those above me requests, and I want to keep my job, and that's the way I work. Right, I'm probably over acquiescing as a social cultural way of being. But from this conversation with Mo, I actually didn't say like, "Oh, I'm a professor. Right? I have my doctorate." Right? I didn't say like, I'm white. He probably thinks I'm white. Right? I didn't say I'm male. He probably thinks I'm male. I didn't say, should we talk about our identity differences? Right? I put a little bit out there about Jersey and my son's name. I don't know how they interpreted. He offered some things about his identity, and there's so much identity conversations on all these intersexual spectrum that Mo and I will have to learn about one another and to navigate together. And I feel pretty confident Mo and I can do that from the interaction I had immediately. So I think about, say, with Mo, and I don't know if this works for therapy exactly, what percentage of time do I spend talking about identity differences with friends of mine who have identity differences? I would say it's probably less than 50% of the time. With my clients, depending on what's alive for them, I would say that's probably true, but it's definitely not 10%. It's more than that. So how do we not get fixated on it and not ignore it? All right, I think I've said enough. I'll let you know what happens between me and Mo and Levi and Salvador, and maybe we'll hit it off. Maybe we won't hit it off. But it was nice to make that connection. Mo was very welcoming to me as I was to him. Actually, later in the walk, I ran into somebody with two young boys on scooters, or male appearing small children on these riders, right, pre-bicycle riders. And I said, hey, hi, you have your hands full. And he said, yes, I do. And I said, oh, how old are they? And he said 3 and 4. And I was like, oh, I'm Francis, I live right over there. And he's like, oh, I'm Dimitri. And Eastern European accent of some type. And I might have said something like, nice to meet you. And he was like, yeah, nice to meet you. And he moved on. He didn't want to engage with me more. And he couldn't do it. He two kids riding bikes in different directions. So maybe I'll run into Dimitri again. I had all kinds of thoughts about like, oh, you must have read the Brothers Karamazov, right? Which is a famous character, a great psychological book. I wouldn't say that, right? That's not how you enter a relationship around differences. So, all right, peace out. Hope this was helpful in some way. I'm trying. I'm sure it wasn't right. You can give me feedback. I'm open to having these conversations. I hope you're open to having these conversations. And we work on this forever in our lives and in our practice. Okay, bye.